right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from lunch. Lunch was pretty good. Thank y'all so much for that. Uh, we're back, and I'm excited about this policy. It's a California bill advocating for access for menstrual products in incarcerated facilities. So that's fun. It's Assembly Bill 1018, and it's a, oh, yeah, 1810, I'm sorry. It's a landmark policy that's transforming the way menstrual products are provided in incarcerated facilities. And sometimes we know that things like that can be abused when you have to request these types of things. And so this policy guarantees automatic and unrestricted access to menstrual products. So that's no more asking, no more barriers, different things like that, right? And so I think it's really important that this policy was shaped and wrote and fought for those who need this, right? And so I'm super excited and honored to introduce someone who can speak directly to this work. That's Sophie Himmel from What We Call Deserve out of California.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. I've been warned in advance that there might be a little cutout in between the switching between Zoom and in-person audio. So if you lose any part of my sentences, please bear with me and feel free to ask any questions in the chat if you miss anything that I say. But hi, and thank you for that lovely introduction. As they said, I'm Sophie Himmel, and thank you all so much for having me. I'm here to tell you guys this afternoon about this bill, AB 1810, which is a piece of legislation that got passed in California in September of 2024. And this bill is an example of how young people advocating for just one advancement in economically just policies at the state level creates really strong precedents for greater economic justice initiatives in the future. So yeah, I am the chief of staff of What We All Deserve, which is the nonprofit organization that backed AB 1810. We are an organization founded and fully operated by young people that fights to pass legislation in states across the country. We research, we make connections with co-authors, legislators, and fellow advocates, amend, write, and try our best to pass legislation. The policy space is incredibly exclusionary and difficult to be involved in, so a major focus of our organization is breaking down any barriers that stand in the way of anyone, especially young people, from accessing the policy system. In late 2022, our founders, Esther Lau and Fiona Liu, wrote and proposed California Senate Bill 260, also known as the Menstrual Equity Act of 2023, into the California legislature. And in doing so, they expanded CalWORK's benefits to cover the purchasing of menstrual products. So in just one policy, these two college students, they were freshmen in college at the time, got a piece of legislation passed that impacted millions of Californians' ability to access items that they need to survive and thrive in their day-to-day life. And in advocating for SB 260, Fiona and Esther noticed the gap in young people involved in organizing for economic justice legislation, such as SB 260. And they realized that they could have an even greater impact if they continued to make space for young people to be involved in the legislative process at the state level, especially now at such a fraught time in our government system. So they proposed to create What We All Deserve, or as we affectionately call it, WAD, as an extension of their experience working on SB 260 to involve more young people in similar work to pioneer economic justice for low-income communities, not only in California, but across the nation as well. And then on the other side of the country, I was also fighting for menstrual equity in my school community, tackling community activism not at the state level, but at the institutional level, fighting to implement menstrual equity initiatives at my college. And so menstrual equity, I can talk a little bit more about because I've mentioned it a couple times at this point. I talked about it, it's SB 260, how WAD got started, and then it's a big center of the bill I'm talking about today, AB 1810. Menstrual equity is essentially the inability to access menstrual products in its simplest form. In one sentence, it's the inability to access menstrual products for whatever reason. Those reasons can span a lot of diversity there. It could be because the products themselves are priced too expensively. It could be due to, again, with more pricing issues, there are tampon taxes or pink taxes in place, sales taxes in many states that are an additional cost on top of the product themselves. But another big marker of menstrual equity is actually just physical proximity to buying products. There are many communities where menstrual products are more than 30 minutes out of the way to acquire. And this was true at my college. I attended Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, and we lived under period poverty at this school because for somebody without access to a car, it would take more than 30 to 45 minutes to access menstrual products. So that meant we were living in an inequitable space for people who menstruate. And so at my college, I worked with fellow students through an organization called LRAGE to implement menstrual equity practices at our college, getting the college to fund menstrual products in all academic and residential buildings on our campus. So that process actually had a similar process to what I'm going to describe today with regards to our policy process at the state level in WAD. And so that is something to be thinking about as well, that this is not a process, the policymaking process doesn't ever have to stay just within the state or the federal policy level or even the city level. It can be spread to all levels of community and institutions that we are in. So these are some examples of the advocacy that Fiona, Esther, and I did in our separate times before we came together and worked on AB 1810. So this video that I have up on the screen is going to talk a little bit more about kind of menstrual equity. But in regards to AB 1810, Fiona and Esther first addressed menstrual equity at the state level in California through CalWORKs. And that was a general kind of discussion and kind of opening that door into further discussing how we can make menstrual products more accessible to Californians of all creeds and backgrounds. And then once they started expanding their impact, they already had their foot in the door. And so they started to think, how can we continue to further menstrual equity in California? And we came across, through a study by the ACLU, the knowledge that incarcerated people are some of the most impacted when it comes to menstrual equity access or lack thereof. And so AB 1810 aimed to address, as we said in the introduction, the access of menstrual products in carceral facilities. Inmates have often faced harassment and denial of the products that they absolutely need for their health and survival. And so with a warning that this discusses like some sensitive and graphic topics, I would like to share this video about what it is like to be a menstruator behind bars and be denied the products that one might need.
Gotta start with the wings.
We're creating something millions of women across the country rely on every month. A standard hygiene product that most of us take for granted and find just reaching under the bathroom sink or making a quick trip to the drugstore.
Normally, you could just peel this back like this.
But this is what incarcerated women often have to do when period products they need aren't available in prison.
Someone could die because of this. So there's very real health consequences that are happening.
Consequences that come no matter what kind of crime women have committed. They come from the extreme steps we're told many behind bars routinely have to take, assembling makeshift tampons and pads, using anything they can find when they don't have access.
MacGyver is the patron saint of prisons because you have to take what you have and make do.
I know that there are stories about people taking stuffing from outside of their beds, from ripping their sheets, from tearing up their clothes, just to make the products that they need.
Kimberly Haven knows it all too well.
When you have to make a makeshift product, that's an act of desperation.
Oh, absolutely it is.
An act she did repeatedly in the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women, paying for her crimes with time served and a lifetime sentence on her health.
When you rip off that cover, all of those little fibers just kind of go airborne and they go up inside of you. And so as a result of that, I ended up coming home and having to have an emergency hysterectomy.
Haven says she had the surgery following her release in 2015, blaming the use of makeshift tampons that caused toxic shock syndrome. Her health crisis spurred by what many consider a human rights issue, still happening in jails and prisons from coast to coast. It's a correctional system we discovered fails to provide incarcerated women with basic needs, stripping them of their dignity, endangering their health, and putting them at risk for exploitation and abuse, all because they, like most women, simply bleed.
It is dehumanizing, it is demeaning, it is a problem universally across the country.
It's a problem fueled by spotty laws and policies that vary from state to state. We found them with help from the Arnold Center for Investigative Journalism at Indiana University. Together, we discovered many states don't have laws or specific written policies requiring that period products be given for free in prisons, leaving women to potentially rely on commissaries they may not be able to afford and that only have a few products to choose from. Some state policies, including Kentucky, Nevada, and South Carolina, only require that women be given pads, but not tampons. And some states even arbitrarily limit how many they can get. Women don't stop getting their periods when they go to prison, so why is it so hard to ensure that they have access to the products everyone else needs?
We make facilities for men. We have men in mind. Men are the default. And so it's seen as like extra to have to worry about this, which is so crazy because if you incarcerate women, you should have to worry about it. Absolutely.
Miriam Vishniak is more than concerned. She's a researcher literally getting her PhD in prison periods.
I realized that I was just sitting on this treasure trove of information.
She spent years compiling the Online Prison Flow Project, interviewing incarcerated women and tracking changing laws, policies, and legal cases involving menstrual product access.
There's no understanding that people need access to these products at all times in all locations.
But that doesn't happen everywhere. Our investigation found only 6 states had policies specifying women should get period products they need at any time of day or night. Most states don't have written policies at all related to availability of products, or said they be given out upon request, meaning women may have to ask when they realize they need them.
Every single woman I talked to, no matter where they'd been in prison or how many years it had been since they were released, every single one of them said it felt like I had to beg like a dog to get what I needed.
When states don't have a law, when states don't have a written policy, what's the impact?
If you have a place that has absolutely no written rule, then what you're doing is leaving it up to individual guards.
That's what Vishniak says can lead to weaponization of period products. It's happened in Alabama, Florida, and New Jersey, with criminal cases highlighting incarcerated women forced to trade sexual favors just to get feminine hygiene products. Situations like that prompted the Federal Bureau of Prisons to create policies requiring that women in its facilities be given a variety of free menstrual products. But that kind of universal access hasn't trickled down across the board to state prisons or local jails across the country.
There's definitely a sense of like, well, we know our prisons better, we know our states better, you know, nobody likes the federal government being like, you need to do this.
And because they don't, our team uncovered egregious delays and restrictions on period product access at the local level, resulting in serious hygiene problems. We filed public records requests in more than 20 cities, finding complaints filed by jailed women forced to use toilet paper and socks after begging for sanitary napkins. Requests for products taking hours or days to fulfill, leaving women to bleed on the floor. And limitations placed on when and where they can obtain products, with some jails saying women have to get them during meals or free time, because that's when personal needs should be accomplished.
This is a basic need, not a luxury. Therefore, incarcerated women should not be forced to beg, barter, bargain to obtain this necessity.
Now they don't in Maryland, where Kimberly Haven and others fought to change the state law and policies to make sure women in any facility have access to free period products at all times.
We can't predict when they need them. We can't predict their flow. We can't, some women have medical issues. So it's very important that we make sure that they have what they need at all times, especially when it comes down to feminine hygiene.
Geneva Holland is the warden of the only state prison that houses women in Maryland.
Yes, this is an intake bag. This is the bag it typically comes in.
She showed us the bags of pads and tampons women in her care and custody get when they arrive. New products, she says, are handed out every 2 weeks, with women told they can ask for more in their housing units 24/7. For her and those who crafted Maryland's law, it's about dignity.
What would you say to states who don't see this issue that clearly, that these women have these basic human rights that should be met?
They need to fix it. They already in prison. They're already serving their time. That's an additional punishment to not give them their basic needs.
Our criminal record does not define us, but what we do to people that are incarcerated is what they bring home. What damage we do and what damage we don't prevent is the damage that they're coming home with, that then our communities then have to work to solve, resolve, help.
Kimberly Haven keeps helping the cause, fighting for women who've lived with the same waiting period behind prison walls.
I would love to see an environment where anybody who menstruates and needs these products has them when they need them, how they need them, with dignity, and that this doesn't become a conversation anymore.
This video shows a bit more of the personal experiences of what it's like to be denied menstrual products. One of the key takeaways from this video for me personally was that one of the incarcerated people who faced menstrual inequity in prison and was routinely denied products said that, really critically, the way that we treat people when they are incarcerated is what they bring back home with them. And I found that really fascinating perspective, especially from an economic justice standpoint, because economic justice really, it's not being embodied at all in the carceral system. And so menstrual equity in the carceral system is looking at rectifying that in order to especially assist with reentry when people finish their sentences. And one thing that isn't mentioned in the video, because it's mentioned, that many inmates have to trade with one another or barter with one another just to get an adequate amount of products. It's mentioned that inmates are each given, when they are given out products, that everyone is given the same amount of products. So there is no consideration for if you have extrauterine bleeding, if you have additional health concerns that cause heavier bleeding, if you're just someone with a heavier flow. All these things, everyone gets the same amount of menstrual products per month, regardless of the actual person's individual need. But what isn't mentioned in the video is how different, like people of different genders and across the gender spectrum deal with their menstrual cycles while incarcerated. And this includes trans men in men facilities and transgender women and non-binary people as well. And this is an avenue of menstrual equity in carceral systems that needs to be further delved into policy-wise as the menstrual equity movement moves forward. So that's something to keep in mind as we continue through this presentation and kind of keep in the back of your mind. Now for the fun part and why I was asked to speak today. How we got this bill passed. How did we get AB 1810 from a foot in the door and thinking about economic justice policy for young people in California to it's a bill that's been signed, it's acted into law by California, the California State Assembly, and it's the law of the land? Well, 4 simple steps. The first step was set a clear goal, gathering allies, advocating, and not stopping. So policy 101, setting a clear goal. When you're looking at policy, as I've said, the policy landscape is incredibly exclusionary and it's very difficult to get involved in policy. And so your best friend when it comes to getting involved in policy making as someone who has no other connections to policy or policymakers is Google. Get on Google, start narrowing your scope. What are you most passionate about? Look at that. Fiona and Esther and I, we were most passionate about menstrual equity right off the bat, and we had that set up. So we already had a pretty big topic, menstrual equity. And you can imagine, as most things when it comes to people's bodies, there's a lot of different realms of the law that legislate upon that. And so there's a lot of different areas we could have looked at. We chose to narrow the scope to incarcerated individuals in California because of that ACLU study and the rest of the information that we found out from Googling and just doing research like all students do. I promise, guys, your teachers do all that stuff to you for a reason. The research papers are really helpful for life. So that's part of narrowing the scope and then finding the angle. So for us, for WAD, our angle was economic justice. We weren't just interested in passing this bill because it's wrong for people not to have, you know, a tampon or a pad when they need it. It's part of a bigger look. We're looking further and not just making it about menstruation, especially because menstruation is something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable to talk about. There's still a lot of stigma around menstruation and talking about menstruation. So for anyone in the room who's a little bit uncomfortable with how many times I've said menstruation in this presentation, buckle up. I've still got a couple more minutes. So with finding our angle, we really looked to economic justice to bring menstrual equity in to a bigger conversation about basic needs. So our angle here was basic needs. We were just making this look like this is just, it's like food, it's like water, it's like shelter. It's a basic hygiene healthcare need. And so that was our angle. We found that angle, we had our research, we had our scope, and then we had to determine our goalpost. And our goalpost was really just like that first step of like, okay, we know what we have an idea, we have something that has a little bit more boundary to it. What's our next step? What is our next step after that? And what do we ultimately want to happen? And so for us, our first goalpost was finding who else cared about this. We think we're pretty smart, but we know we're not geniuses. We're not the only people in the world who've ever thought about menstrual equity for incarcerated people. Of course we're not. So we wanted to ally with other people who felt similarly and had been doing this work already at the state and local level. So we've set that goal. We're out to gather allies. And in gathering those allies, we came across a lot of wonderful advocates and legislators, two of which being California Assembly member Bryan and Bonta, both of whom have a long history of policymaking that supports the criminal justice space in California. Excuse me. And we also worked with two other nonprofit organizations, the Los Angeles Regional Reentry Partnership, which is a network that focuses on reentry as a whole and looking at holistic resources for reentry for the whole county of Los Angeles, as well as A New Way of Life, which is more direct access based as an organization. So they focus more on the individual experiences of formerly incarcerated individuals reentering into their communities, looking at pro bono legal services, etc. So through these four allies, we were able to gain more resources, a greater capacity, and greater access. So we found all the things that we didn't have as young people in our allies. We found people who had experience in state government. We had people with experience with incarcerated individuals, and we found organizations that were directly involved with incarcerated individuals so that we could base the policymaking we were doing around the lived experiences of people who had actually been incarcerated and faced this particular kind of discrimination. So we then went on with our allies to look at where we could impact menstrual equity in California. And we found the state penal code has very specific law about how menstrual equity or how menstrual products were meant to be delved out in the past. And the state formally said that a person incarcerated in state prison who menstruates or experiences uterine or vaginal bleeding shall have ready access to and be allowed to use materials necessary for personal hygiene, et cetera, et cetera. Now, on the surface, it sounds like, oh, any person shall have ready access to and be allowed to use any material necessary for personal hygiene. Great, that's awesome. Obviously, from the lived experience of people in the carceral system in California and across the country, we know that that is not the case. That is not the lived experience. There is not that ready access. It is not readily given. It is something that is actively withheld. It is something that is abused in exchange for sexual services between inmates and correctional officers. It is something that is a very vulnerable topic for many of the inmates and leaves them to feel very ashamed. and is an additional layer to the inequity that they face in the carceral system. So instead of looking at writing an entirely new bill and fighting for an entirely new bill and getting the bill through the committees in the state assembly and getting the bill passed up through the state Senate and getting it on Newsom's desk the way that we did with the Menstrual Equity for All Act, our allies who had the experience of state government, Assembly members Brian and really suggested that we look at amending an existing bill. So that's why we look to amend the penal code. And so instead of just having shall, we had to think about the language we were using in order to consider how do we make this something that can improve the lives of the incarcerated people who are facing menstrual inequity. So we added shall without needing to request. Without needing to request returns the autonomy in language. With that language, it returns the autonomy to the folks who are incarcerated, and it allows them to be the people who always should have been in charge of their healthcare and their personal hygiene. We did it as well for Section 4 of the bill, which focused on specifically the California juvenile justice system, so that we addressed both the youth carceral system and the adult carceral system with the amendment of this penal code. So we gathered our allies, we have our goal, we're working towards our goal. Now we're on to the advocation process.
CDCR facilities are non-compliant with state mandates regarding menstrual product distribution. Even worse are the documented cases of CDCR officers withholding period products as a form of retaliation against incarcerated women who have filed formal complaints against them. Nationwide, there have been numerous reports of correctional officers using access to menstrual products to coerce incarcerated women into sexual favors. Those gross abuses of power have created conditions where incarcerated people do not feel comfortable asking for the menstrual products they need and deserve, even when they are free of cost, due to the fear that it will lead to that kind of coercion, humiliation, or harassment. These women would rather makeshift pads and tampons out of toilet paper and bed sheets rather than put themselves in an unsafe and undignified position of asking their correctional officers, often men, for a menstrual product. In some cases, they're walking around in bloodstained clothes because they've run out of their supply of menstrual products and are only allowed to do laundry on certain days. This lack of timely and adequate access to pads and tampons has led to severe health complications such as urinary tract infections, toxic shock syndrome, and in some cases, hysterectomies for incarcerated people. So while our state currently guarantees free menstrual products, they often come at a price of humiliation and abuse for incarcerated women. AB 1810 will bring our state closer to the menstrual health equity needed by requiring that menstrual products are free and readily available for all incarcerated women. It will also bring our state closer to parity with several other states that have been leading in this category, such as Louisiana, Tennessee, and Florida, all of which do not require their incarcerated women to request these basic necessities from their correctional officers. Today, I have with me Alyssa Moore from Legal Services for Prisoners and Children to provide testimony.
Thank you. You have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Moore. Today, I'm the reentry coordinator for All of Us or None. That said, I served a total of 25 years in both local and state facilities, both as a juvenile and adult. I entered this California state prison system at 17 years old, still very much a child. I will start by explaining the dynamic between staff and incarcerated peoples. As you are fully aware of the rampant sexual assaults and harassments in California women's facilities at present, it won't be too much of a stretch to envision, if you will, what I'm about to share. Imagine being sexualized by the majority of staff you come in contact with. Imagine daily unwarranted catcalls, comments on your body, your looks, etc. And let that be the least of the worst that you imagine. With that being said, I'm already fearful of most staff, the majority of which are male. I personally not only witnessed the harassment, assault, and rapes of my peers, but also was subject to several assaults during my incarceration, most of which were reported by other incarcerated individuals to staff. These matters were investigated and never was anyone fired for it in my case. I was never protected. I often felt humiliated and ashamed and embarrassed when I would have to, on occasion, ask the same staff that had victimized me for sanitary supplies. I'd like it to be known that if you have a heavy flow or a medical condition, the amount that is issued is not, to each individual, does not suffice. And it should be noted, if my reason for needing more needing more supplies is a medical condition, it's also a HIPAA violation for me to have to disclose this to a CO to receive supplies. But it's still an active practice in the state of California today. When I was in the general population, I would trade and barter for my peers for extra pads and tampons. So more often than not, I would use this method to acquire what I need rather than deal with the humiliation of asking an officer that had previously assaulted me, because I never knew when they would use that opportunity to deny me or humiliate me for what I needed. Also, this became a much larger issue when I was in solitary confinement in what is known as the SHU or ADSEG, due to the fact I was totally at the mercy of the correctional officers, and it is totally acceptable. And there are no forms of protections for any incarcerated individuals, and no timeline in which sanitary supplies must be issued. And even though there are logs and charts to keep track of this, officers easily and often falsify these documents. CDCR is fully aware that they do not, cannot, or will not issue adequate sanitary supplies in a timely manner. And this is why there are tampons, sanitary pads, and even toilet paper available for purchase on Canteen and in all vendor care packages. So what this means is that even though we are considered state property, the existing protection for our menstrual supplies that is both state and federal is falling short of the mark and causing more harm. As it is common for incarcerated individuals and their families to pay for these items themselves rather than be humiliated. Therefore, I strongly ask for your support of AB 1810 so that incarcerated women will not have to continue with this humiliating, harmful treatment from CDCR.
So that personal testimony kind of goes more into the personal experiences and the severe abuse and humiliation that inmates are forced to endure at the hands of the state, ultimately, who are responsible for inmates during their time in state carceral facilities. And so the key takeaways from our assembly meeting and our advocacy for this bill are, number one, that community involvement plus lived experience plus a strong angle equals a policy success. Having actively engaged organizations such as A New Way of Life and LARRP, we had community involvement, and we had the youth involvement from us coming in and being engaged and speaking with other youth who had worked with LARRP in the past and youth who'd been involved in A New Way of Life as well. We had lived experience. So we had like formerly incarcerated individuals advocating, as you just saw, in the assembly, fighting for this bill, fighting for justice for themselves and for other incarcerated individuals. And then we had a really strong angle. We had our basic needs angle. We were saying, this is inhumane. This is wrong. This is a basic need that the state is supposed to provide, just like food, just like water, just like toilet paper. And they're not. It's a basic need that needs to be provided to incarcerated individuals. That gives us policy success. Now, another key point, especially when it comes to being a young person in policy, is that policy success does not always mean that the bill is passed every time. A policy success could mean that you just got really strong bipartisan support and set up a great foundation to try and run the bill again in the following legislative session. We were really lucky with AB 1810 and with the really great bipartisan support that we got in the California Assembly, we were able to pass AB 1810 and sign it into law to make sure that incarcerated individuals are given full access to the products that they need. And so that impact of bipartisanship really came from having that aspect of lived experience and the angle of basic needs. And basic needs is really the one thing that can bring all people of all parties together, because it's basic. It's something that all people need no matter what. We all need food, we all need water, we all need shelter, we all need some form of healthcare, and etc. So those are some things I wanted to highlight from our advocacy in getting the bill from the kind of amendment stage into assembly session and even further from there. So we advocated, with our allies, we were reaching our goal, but now for the fourth step. Don't stop. But Sophie, you ask, why? Why would you not stop? You met your goal. You succeeded. You passed the bill. Great job. Mazel tov. Well, because you picked a small niche, right? When we were talking at the beginning about setting a goal, we're talking about narrowing the scope. We narrowed our scope to carceral facilities in California. There's carceral facilities in all 50 states. There's federal laws that address menstruation and menstrual inequity. And there's so much more room for these policies to grow and to build on one another and to use each other as precedent. So now California can join the other states that Assemblymember Bryan mentioned in his testimony. Florida, Louisiana. Now, if, for example, Utah advocates wanted to fight and pass for a bill similarly to AB 1810, you have 4 states that you can use as policy precedent when you're fighting for this bill in the future. So not stopping is part of contributing to the movement. Representative Grace Meng, U.S. Congresswoman Grace Meng, particularly embodies this. She is fighting for menstrual equity at the federal level. She has introduced the Menstrual Equity for All Act and is fighting to end period poverty. And so that's one way that policy can continue to be fought for even after a policy success. Is just, all right, what's the next big ticket? What's the next step? The goalposts can keep moving, which is one of my personal favorite things about policy. That even as you gain success and gain new policies under your belt, there's always something more that can be done to fight for more economically just policies in a more economically just world. So what's next for WAD? Well, we are continuing to grow our economic justice policy platform and grow our organizational capacity in doing so. Right now, actually, we have opened our first paid policy incubator fellowship. And if anyone would like to apply, this is my little plug. We are closing our applications on June 13th. But yeah, if you would be interested in making some policy with us, we would certainly love to have you. And you can find more info on our website. You can just Google What We All Deserve to learn more about that. And other than that, we're looking forward to continuing to fight for economic justice in all the states we have state teams in. Not just California, for the upcoming legislative session this fall. So yeah, thank you guys so much. And I will now turn it over to the panel for the Q&A.
Awesome. Let's give Sophie a round of applause. Yeah. Sophie, y'all are doing a really great job. Well, I come from Mississippi, where, you know, most of the incarcerated facilities are privately owned, underfunded, overcrowded. And so for you all to recognize the need for menstrual products in these facilities are important. And so I appreciate that. And you all are laying the framework for other states to copy this or develop and be innovative in their own way. And so I'll start off with the first question. How will ready access be operationalized in different facility types? State prisons, county jails, or juvenile facilities?
Yeah, so the amendment process was passed in September, and so the legislative process over the fall and winter has just wrapped up in January, which is 6 months ago in real person time, but in policy time, everything moves a little bit slower. I have likened it to kind of moving through molasses in the past. As I'm sure you're all familiar, it can take quite a long time for that kind of change to come. So we are just now starting to get that kind of early data on it, and it's been clear thus far that this hasn't begun to be implemented. So it is something that we are still in contact with Assemblymember Bryan about, and continuing to ensure that this is a policy that is actually implemented. So it's something that we are continuing to track via Assemblymember Bryan. But remaining active in the advocacy conversation, and if necessary, happy to return to the table to continue that fight. Yeah.
I'll pass it to Isabel. She'll kind of expound on what I asked a little bit too.
Thank you. Yes. My question is kind of building on that, maybe asking it in a different way. But when you say ready access, can you explain to us what that means? Does that mean that they're provided monthly, that they're in restroom areas, like just kind of defining what it means to be readily accessible?
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Yeah. So going back to kind of what I was talking about earlier about menstrual equity and kind of how that can differentiate in different people's understanding of it. So when I was fighting for menstrual equity at my college, I often faced that kind of question of, well, why do we have to have it in more spaces? We already have it in the student food pantry. Why, we already have tampons and pads there. Why should we need to put them anywhere else? Doesn't that count? No, that's why we had to make it ready access. When the penal code initially was just that all inmates shall have access to these menstrual products upon request. That allowed for, the products to be contained in one small space and to only be doled out when the correctional officers decided they wanted to dole them out. As the woman who spoke in her testimony said, that was often just completely by the correctional officer's discretion and often did not follow the monthly protocol that the state itself actually set. So the idea with menstrual equity is making the products available at all times. So ideally, those products would just be available for free in like a vending machine type of capacity. So that is something that a lot of schools have implemented, a lot of higher education institutions, even some high school and middle schools have done this with vending machines. And so it's something that that's a similar angle that we are looking for state carceral facilities to take as well when it comes to that ready access issue, something that's available day and night, pretty much. Yeah.
Just a follow-up on that, there's no text specifically in the bill that defines what it means to be readily accessible. That lays out that, which is kind of where that question comes from, is when legislatures are reading this or people are implementing this, do you feel that that will be a barrier in terms of how different jurisdictions and districts define that and understand it of what it means to be readily accessible, and perhaps is impacting the data that you're seeing coming in over the past several months and in the future?
Definitely. But that's something that is true across the menstrual equity advocacy space. And it's something that I dealt with at the PWI, the predominantly white institution that I was advocating for menstrual equity at my college. So it's true not just at the state level, it's true across all 50 states, I would go so far as to say. And no matter where one is trying to implement menstrual equity, there is going to be that misunderstanding. And this amendment, I know it was a simple change. It was crossing out one word and replacing it with 4, but it took, I can't begin to say how many months of emails and meetings just to get those 4 words changed in the penal code. And so we considered it a step forward in the menstrual equity movement and not a final step. So for us, it was just a moving of the goalpost. And yeah, it definitely would, I would say, impact the data coming through because we're dealing with, differences in understanding of menstrual equity point blank. And so it's hard to, in a bill, explain all of what we believe menstrual equity to be and then get an entire assembly to sign off on it as part of the bill, and that they're signing off on that exact understanding of menstrual equity. That's something that will be more difficult to do, but we're hoping that with continual progress towards menstrual equity in every aspect of day-to-day society, that we can get to a common understanding of menstrual equity that includes that general no access barred that you were getting to.
Thank you for that. So what mechanisms for oversight and accountability are included to ensure compliance, especially in the light of documented abuse where access was used as like leverage?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is where the formula aspect that I kind of talked about after the assembly member kind of example of what that hearing was like. That's the community kind of involvement aspect. So the organizations that were already in place and already doing this reentry work and this data collection and really focusing all of their time, all of their energy, and all of their effort onto reentry and incarcerated peoples and the struggles and abuses that they're facing. They are continuing that work, and that is why it was so important for us to partner with them, because we didn't want to have to, create a whole new infrastructure for us to, be self-managing and, as young people coming into the space, also doing full-time job, full-time school, full-time everything else, on top of being people who really care about our communities and our state policies. We knew that we didn't have the capacity to track and monitor the bill following its completion if it was successful in its passing. And luckily it was, and luckily we were able to connect with such great allies in this policy fight. And so, yeah, those organizations are continuing their contact and collaboration with that. So we kind of came in from the youth perspective with wanting to bring more voice to young people and the juvenile justice system and what they face as well, and making sure that Section 4 was amended along with Sections 1 and 3.
Awesome, thank you. I'll pass it to you, the co-panelists.
This is first question is just quick. Are there private prisons that you're aware of in California? Because his question made me think of that.
Yeah, there's definitely private prisons in California. I'm not aware of the exact number, but definitely.
Okay, and this bill, is there any state oversight of those prisons, or any way to make sure that they also comply with something like this?
No.
Well, so California banned for-profit prisons in 2019, obviously then going into COVID and a lot of other budget cuts in 2020 and 2021 in California. There was a lot going on there. So I am not aware of the oversight on the entire carceral system in California. But as I said, this bill was not meant to address all of menstrual equity in every carceral system in the world. It was meant to address the impacts that are felt by incarcerated individuals in California state prisons and carceral facilities, because we know that this movement is a mosaic, and we're just one tile piece. We're not trying to be the whole picture. We're just trying to add one piece of legislation that's going to create further precedent so that we can tackle this issue in private prisons. Obviously, ideally, we would tackle private prisons entirely, but that's a presentation for another day.
Have you seen, either from your group or your partners, any work with the U.S. Department of Justice and the Bureau of Prisons to get this into federal prisons as well? I know California is going to have Alcatraz back very soon, so yeah, I know. So yeah.
Yeah. So as I've mentioned, menstrual equity and just menstruation in general carries a lot of stigma. And so you'd be surprised, actually probably not, at how uncomfortable people are talking about it outside of left of center political spaces. It is something that has barred me from doors just from even walking in the room, just because I wanted to talk about periods. And I wanted to talk about blood, and that grossed people out, and they didn't want to hear about it because it's private and that's a personal thing and it's a health thing, and that's none of my business, that's your business. And so it is something that the federal government has been really unwilling to delve into, because it's not like the abortion issue, where there is another life at stake in that case, where the state has some control in that case. With menstruation, it really is more about just the individual person and their healthcare access. And for the federal government, where they stand right now at the judicial level and the legislative level, they are not in a position where they want to address people who menstruate as autonomous beings with healthcare needs. So it's not an avenue that we have approached yet, or really seen success in that approach, but it's something that advocates have always striven for in the menstrual equity movement and are working towards. And so I think a lot of, especially as young advocates, really looking to what adults have been saying since Trump got in office in 2020, turn to the state legislatures, turn towards your states, turn towards your local governments. And so that was really our goal here, was turn towards California, turn towards our home base, focus on our home base, and see what impact we can make from home for other people in their home and inspire other people in their home. Because like I said, we're only one piece of the puzzle. So yeah.
Thank you. I want to chime in. You spoke on stigma. And so what does this policy send or say about how we value the lives and dignity of incarcerated people, especially women and those a part of the LGBTQI plus community?
I mentioned also during the presentation about how often transgender individuals are left out of this conversation, especially when it comes to discussing the carceral facilities, because carceral facilities also are built for men. They're built for male bodies. They are not built for female bodies, let alone people who identify with, different parts of the gender spectrum and transgender individuals. So with our bill, we were hoping to break down that stigma, at least in some part at the state level, by, making ready access the norm, by making ready access the norm and having the policy dictate that the products are available and accessible. The item itself speaks so much louder than you would expect. During my time as a college advocate, I also worked with the National Organization Advocates for Youth and was one of their campus ambassadors. And so I was responsible for running and maintaining a product outreach program for Plan B, for condoms, for urinary tract infection testing strips, for all kinds of reproductive health products. And what I saw from running that program alone was that just having access to the products themselves increased people's desire naturally to talk about it. And it increased their desire to come and ask me questions about it. The physical product itself really inspired thought in people, and from that experience, I really was so proud to see WAD doing this work because I knew firsthand that, the physical product, like in your space and in your face in some ways, even when it's, just something that's like, oh, that's a new dispenser on the wall. What's that for? And you go over and investigate it and, oh, it's a free tampon. That's nice. I wonder why that's there. And, oh, when have I maybe needed a free tampon? And it can really inspire, thinking in people about why those products aren't available generally, and hopefully that then too inspires other young people to say, well, I had these products, or formerly incarcerated individuals, even if it could inspire them to say, well, I had these products when I was incarcerated, and they re-enter into their community, they hopefully get a job and they are working full-time again, and they say, hey, why don't I have these products at my job, at my place of work? This is something that I need when I'm here. And even that conversation of, oh, well, why would they need that? That's a personal thing. They should just bring that at home. That's part of breaking down that stigma too. So everywhere that we can introduce menstrual equity is a new potential to inspire menstrual equity somewhere else as well, if that makes sense.
Sophie, my final question for you is there any provision in any existing code that requires officers or those correctional employees to make sure that those inmates have access to it? So basically, if there is a vending machine with those free products, but obviously it's going to be outside the cells, and there's a time where those individuals are in their cells and they need a product, they don't have any in their cell, are the correctional officers required to let them out and get that product? I just don't want it obviously to be used again as a thing of like them threatening the inmates, and I don't know what the restrictions are as far as what inmates can keep in their cell, so I don't know if they can even store extras in their cell. So could you help us understand a little bit of that side?
Sure thing. So again, as I said, like the data on like what correctional officers are doing, and this was like discussed as well in the presentation. Basically, the correctional officers falsify the reports. So no matter what, the correctional officers are, I would say they're like a lesser kind of evil within the criminal justice system. So in order to address the abuse that individuals are facing menstrually by correctional officers, we need to address the violence and abuse of correctional officers across the board. in carceral systems. So it's a much bigger issue than just this one bill. And so I think that, your question is exactly a great gateway into like another goalpost, and that's a great, thing that we want this bill to do is we want to inspire that kind of questioning where we're like, yeah, no, like where else is this not happening? Where else are people getting abused that have no reason to be getting abused? Where else are people, being discriminated against for, just having basic needs? So yeah, I really appreciate that question. I hope that answers it a bit.
Hi, okay. So going back to that ready access verbiage, that suggests that there's always going to be like a stream of menstrual products available. So I wanted to ask, are there any like limits or budget constraints or any sort of anything like that on the amount of menstrual products? Okay, I already see that you're shaking.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. So the language, so I've been saying ready access, the exact language in the bill is shall, without needing to request, have ready access to and be allowed to use materials necessary for personal hygiene. So exactly what you just said. That means like no, there should be no budget restraint on that because it's have ready access to without needing to request. So if any budget were to not follow that, that budget would be out of line with the state law.
Okay, thank you. And my other question was, how do you intend to measure and evaluate the impact that this policy has?
So we are continually meeting with Assemblymember Bryan, as well as Assemblymember Bonta, about, this bill and also about how we as an organization can contribute to furthering criminal justice in California, even beyond this AB 1810. So by continuing our relationships with the Assembly members and LARRP and A New Way of Life, we are continually checking in with how are things going with this? Have you heard news from this? What are our advocates saying? What are the incarcerated individuals we spoke to saying about this? What are the lived experiences of people here? That's the number one way that we as an organization are measuring things right now. And as things progress and as time goes forward, we're gonna continue to check in and when there is an opportunity for additional legislation, we certainly want to chime in on that and be a part of that policy process, because as many of your questions have pointed out, there is still so much further for menstrual equity to go. And for me personally, I would love if there could be a tampon parade every month in every city of the country. I just want tampons and pads flying out of floats everywhere, every which way. That's my dream. That's my menstrual equity. But obviously, it's a long way to go before we actually reach that equity kind of goalpost, as it were.
All right, I have my final question here. And so, again, I come from rural Mississippi where there are known resource disparities. So how can AB 1810 ensure equitable access to menstrual products in facilities with known resource disparities, such as rural county jails or detention centers?
Absolutely. That is another key issue that is not really addressed well in the policies surrounding the menstrual equity kind of movement, especially in the carceral facilities as it stands now nationwide. So I would honestly say that there isn't really a great infrastructure for that right now. And that is largely because this bill doesn't challenge the financial inequities of individual facilities. So it doesn't challenge the budgetary makeup of the state or how the state funds different facilities or how these facilities get their funds. And so that is another aspect of menstrual equity that I, as an advocate, really have connected with over time, is that when you start looking at menstrual equity long enough, you start to realize, oh, I can use menstrual equity to fight for every issue on the planet because of exactly that. There are facilities that are severely underfunded, which means that the individuals incarcerated within them are being treated even worse. And thus, that's an issue that needs to be rectified. And if we can use this precedent in AB 1810 to say, okay, AB 1810, people need these products. Now that we've proven it can be passed in state law and supported bipartisanly, okay, people need these products. The California State Assembly has agreed people need these products. Now we can turn and pivot to those, we can turn to pivot at the criminal justice system as a whole and say, okay, well, this funding, that the way it's allocated prevents this law that's already been passed, this thing that's already a law, from being actually implemented. And thus that law and that budget now needs to be amended as well. And so that's kind of how it opens up opportunity for future growth and future economic justice.
Awesome, thank you. We have 5 minutes left, so we'll open up the chat to questions and then the audience. And so we'll start with the chat first.
We have one question in the chat from Nia from TIP. She says, you've spoken about the economic justice impacts of this legislation, but the video you shared really implies that there are significant mental health implications too. Can you speak to how you think about mental health in this work?
That is a great question. Thank you so much for that. Mental health plays a really big role in the menstrual equity space and reproductive rights as a whole. Because we can talk about it from the policy level as we have been all afternoon, but the reality is that this is just a person's body that we're legislating upon. And we're discussing, the experiences that people go through every month, if not more frequently, depending on, like I said, your body. And so the mind to body kind of connection, how the state laws and public health policies impact that are really not looked at enough. And so I really appreciate that question. I would say that mental health is like the most overlooked aspect of menstrual equity. Just considering, again, like how stigma can impact a person, how the individuals that we're working with, that we want to advocate for and want to help advocate for themselves, are often also traumatized individuals. And so, how we operate is really from not only a trauma-informed lens, but also with the knowledge that our advocates and like the people that we are trying to show up for are not always going to show up maybe in the way that we expect, or we maybe as policymakers might want them to. We might want a very polished look. We might want a very, kind of specific way of being or presenting oneself at like an assembly meeting or a hearing. But the reality is that's not what human beings are like. And we're not making policy for perfect human beings. We're making policy for everyday Americans. And everyday Americans have mental health issues and have trauma. And so I think as an advocate and in this work, I think the biggest thing I've thought about with this is really just that, like, people are going to be weird, and you have to have grace, and you have to give them grace, and you have to give them as much guidance as you can, while also not stifling them. And learning to walk that line is something I'm definitely still doing as a youth advocate.
Awesome, thank you. We'll have 2 questions from the audience.
Check. Hi there. I'm Hunter. I'm with Justice by Objectives, and we work closely with folks involved in incarceration. I'm actually curious because I know someone had brought up budget constraints when it comes to menstrual products, and something that has come in recent years kind of in that category has been menstrual cups. And I was kind of wondering what kind of progress there is in that realm, because they are reusable. You can have them for years on end. That's probably pretty profit enticing for the prisons as well on that devil's advocate end. But how has that conversation moved going forward? Because I do think that's something that, as part of that ready accessibility that we're talking about, I think that can really alleviate that issue too. So.
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, menstrual cups, I don't know if you saw me nodding vigorously along while you were asking the question, but yeah, menstrual cups are an amazing alternative product to tampons and pads. Number one being that they're reusable, which means that there's no pollution contribution with menstruation, which is something that also goes often overlooked when it comes to menstrual equity and menstruation, is that tampons and pads are waste and they contribute to pollution. And trying to figure out a way to reconcile that with human rights and also protecting the planet is very difficult, and menstrual cups do a great job of reconciling that issue. And yeah, product of choice is definitely a major next step for the menstrual equity movement in general, just beyond, you know, the conversation of like, hey, we can talk about pads and tampons in public, you guys, it's okay, to then like, and also, you know, with menstrual cups and everything else. So right now, the product of choice conversation is really that it should be product of choice accessible. And so menstrual cups are accessible under this kind of without needing to request, have ready access to language. However, it's also not something that we can only have the state give out menstrual cups, because there are people who don't like using them or like are freaked out by using them and are like really comfortable with just using a pad or just using a tampon. You know, everyone has a way that they like to do things, so it's included as a product of choice, but it's definitely not as widely available as I would like them to be. Yeah.
Any other question? Right down here. Right here, very front seat here.
Hi, thank you for such a great presentation and all the important work that you do. I had a question because I noticed, and this might be kind of like hyper specific, but I noticed the like language in the portion of the policy text that you used, and I really appreciated, first of all, that it was like very gender neutral, because in the state where I live in Ohio, we have like a lot of anti-trans legislation and such. But I was curious about the part that said people who can get pregnant can access contraceptives. And so I was curious if there's been like any like issue or barrier for like people who like can't get pregnant but still have periods and want to like potentially stop their periods because of pain or they're too heavy or any other reason like that.
Yeah, the answer is absolutely yes. I don't have specific data on that for you in this moment. I would definitely have to look that up for specific data, but without a doubt, absolutely. We still have cases of pregnant people who are being chained to beds because they are incarcerated while they're giving birth. And so I, without a doubt, can say that incarcerated people are getting denied access to medication that they need to manage their health the way that they want to manage it, especially when it comes to contraceptives. And I can only imagine that that will become a more fraught situation that we need to keep a very close eye on as politics in this country continue down the path that they're on at this moment, as we try to steer the ship perhaps in a new direction. So yeah, it's definitely something that needs to be continued to have a close eye on.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophie, so much for the great presentation and the awesome questions, guys. That'll conclude this presentation. Can we give Sophie a round of applause?